Joining us now is Jared Kushner, the senior advisor to President Trump. And Jared, it's great to have you with us. You've had quite a week. You're getting used, I suspect, to quite the extraordinary weeks. The administration continues to make great strides and advances. These are historic. Give us your thoughts. You've been working hard with the president and the Secretary of State to bring this to fruition.
Well, thank you, Lou, for having me. It's great to be with you. This was a great week. Yesterday, we saw at the White House that President Trump presided over the signing of two separate peace agreements, one between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and one between Israel and Bahrain. These were the first two peace agreements that we've seen in the Middle East in 26 years. And when President Trump ran for office, the Middle East was a total mess. You had ISIS had a caliphate the size of Ohio. Iran was very emboldened thanks to the terrible deal that the previous administration made that gave them $150 billion of capital that they used to fund terror. People were radicalizing the youth. And President Trump really put an end to that. He took his first trip to Saudi Arabia as president. He laid out his plan for how he wanted to fix the Middle East. And this week we've harvested some of the fruit from that plan. So a lot of the people who have been hysterical about President Trump said that if he became president, we'd start World War III. Well, yesterday showed that he actually did just the opposite, where he was able to make the first peace deal in the Middle East in 26 years. And he did not just one deal, but two deals, which is why, again, the American people love the results that President Trump is bringing.
Well, who would not, other than, of course, the radical Dems and the left in this country? No one has been more egregiously opposed to Trump Middle East policy than John Brennan, who is not only the former director of the Obama-era CIA, but also a suspect. You can add the number. I would put him in the top 5 of those leading the Obamagate scandal against President Trump. Let's go back to May 14th of 2018 and what Brennan had to say about the Trump initiatives in the Middle East. Deaths, he said, in Gaza result of utter disregard. If we could put this up, please, this full screen. Deaths in Gaza result of utter disregard of Messrs. Trump and Netanyahu for Palestinian rights and homeland. By moving embassy to Jerusalem, Trump played politics, destroyed U.S. peacemaker role. New generation of Israelis, Palestinians need to isolate extremists to find path to peace. Brennan, we could go on with almost the entire national security staff of the White House in those years. They were wrong, and they were wrong. President Trump has, through the course of his first term in office, been proved right not only in the Middle East and in culminating in these agreements, these historic agreements, but throughout his presidency. He has been right on the Federal Reserve. He's been right on interest rates. He has been right on China, on tariffs and economic growth, taxation and tax cuts. The list goes on, and yet your administration doesn't get the credit, near the credit that it deserves. Only assault from the left and the radical Dems. And now comes Nancy Pelosi wanting to talk about the stimulus package, the China virus relief package. Are you seriously going to entertain, is the president going to entertain a $3 trillion number? Because he left it ambiguous as to what number he was talking about when he talked to Republicans saying go for the higher number.
Right. So President Trump's a deal maker. He always leaves all things open, but he's a pragmatist, and at the end of the day, he'll do whatever he thinks is best to make the American people safer and more prosperous. You just showed before John Brennan's comments. Again, they did not understand President Trump. They didn't understand why he won. They didn't understand his supporters. They didn't understand how frustrated the country was with seeing decades of failed leadership in Washington. People who sent our soldiers overseas.
They not only didn't understand. Yeah, they did not only not understand President Trump, and they still don't. They didn't obviously understand the Middle East or the policies that were necessary to achieve the kind of success that President Trump has has achieved here.
And he took a different approach, and that's
we
why
can't
he
find
achieved a
anything
different
we can
outcome.
point to. Yeah, different, straightforwardly. You look at what they did. They gave $150 billion to the Treasury of Iran, the largest state sponsor of terrorism. And as the saying goes, you get what you subsidized. And they effectively were subsidizing not only terrorism, but continued chaos and pain and suffering throughout the Middle East in far too many Arab states. You have reversed that. The president has reversed the decline of this country on the world stage. Give us a sense of what is happening with TikTok and the Chinese, the deal in which TikTok would maintain ByteDance would maintain majority control. That sounds like an awfully bad deal. Tell us what makes sense about it that is not, at least to me, obvious.
Right. So I think there's two separate questions. One is about TikTok, and the second one's about China more broadly. With regards to TikTok, the president obviously took a very strong action to say that he wanted to protect the national security interests of America. He wanted to protect their privacy and their data. He put in place a very strong action that said that if he doesn't get a satisfactory outcome, he's going to shut the company down. They responded by submitting a deal to the CFIUS review board, and I know that's under review, so I can't comment on it at this time, but I do believe that it's being adjudicated on the merits of whether it's going to protect American citizens' security, and then it will be brought to the president, and I'm sure he'll make the right decision. And with regards to China more broadly, obviously we're still fighting through this pandemic. I think that President Trump's done a great job of getting our country to a place where our economy is rebounding. We're very rapidly accelerating vaccines and therapeutics, and we've gotten all the PPE and supplies to all the governors and the hospitals that have needed it. But President Trump obviously knows that there's some very tough discussions to be had with China, and obviously based on the track record that President Trump has in the first 3 years, nobody's been tougher on China with his policies. He's very angry about all the jobs that left our country, but unlike past politicians, he wasn't just talking about it, he actually took action, and he was reversing the course before the pandemic came. But my sense is that once we get through this pandemic, President Trump will rebuild the economy, bring our jobs back faster than anyone thinks, and make our economy rise to a higher place than we were before.
Okay, I want to return to ByteDance and TikTok because it is the president who put this forward, and CFIUS, frankly, I don't care about because they're 99.9% of their decisions. They rubber stamp what a president. It isn't just with this administration, but as you well know, they rubber stamp decisions and very seldom oppose the president. The president's view here was that he wanted them to divest. That is, ByteDance, a Chinese company with absolute obligations to the Communist Chinese Party and government. How could this possibly be a construct that makes sense in which Oracle would end up with minority status, not even majority control, and furthermore, then have the company headquartered in the United States? That sounds like a preposterous construction of a deal to follow the president's orders to divest by September 15th.
Right. Well, you know better than anyone, Lou, that if the president doesn't like a deal, he won't be afraid to walk away from it. He did that several times with China when we were negotiating. He obviously used tariffs. He threatened with Mexico and with Canada, and he didn't settle for a good deal. He waited till he got the deal that he really wanted, and he made that deal. So the president will review this deal as it comes in. I know that he's been briefed preliminarily, but I think that they'll give him the full brief once they've gone through the review, so they can show him whether it does secure protects the data of American citizens or not, and then on the proper basis, he'll make the right adjudication as he has before.
He has been historically right on so many things. That is not my concern. My concern is our audience understanding how what looks to be a very peculiar construction be rational and sustainable, protecting the national interest, which is, I think you would exceed, is not obvious. Jerry Kushner, it's always great to talk with you. We appreciate it.